SAFTU's General Secretary Zwelinzima Vavi says the hike in the repo rate will have a severe impact on the working class. The South African Reserve Bank yesterday opted to increase the repo rate by 75 basis points. That means it now sits at 6.25%. Let's talk more about the impact of the increase on consumers. We're joined now by consumer law expert Trudi Broekmann. Trudi, very good afternoon to you. Welcome to Daytime Update. This rate increase, do you think it'll be able to stave off another rise in consumer inflation?
Well, I'm not an economist. I'm a consumer attorney. So what I can speak to is the impact on consumers. I am, on behalf of consumers, very hopeful that this will be the case and that the Reserve Bank's interventions will act in the interest of consumers in the longer term. In the short term, however, what consumers are facing is a real triple whammy, in fact, a quadruple whammy. We're having the interest rate hikes, so that affects a portion of our economy, the ones who have retail accounts, vehicle finance, and are paying off housing loans, which is the sort of middle class of South Africa, and the ones on which the economy relies in a very real way. And if the economy is strong, then in the longer term, the consumer is going to be, or this middle class of consumer is going to be fine. But what we need is in the short term, the consumer is really feeling the pinch from so many sides. As I said, interest rate hikes, huge hikes in food prices. We're facing the impact of Eskom's power cuts in fuel and transport costs, which are partly caused by the war in the Ukraine. So a short-term crisis really for consumers in terms of how squeezed they are. In the longer term, we're hoping that a lowering of inflation will stabilize the economy, will lead to a growth in jobs and just ease the pressures on consumers in respect of the other two legs of the quadruple whammy that they face.
So given those multiple factors, then some of them international even, which would be the easiest for people to sort of respond to or work around?
Well, I think as a nation we are slowly trying to find all kinds of workarounds. The power outages, people are stocking up on UPSs and all kinds of things. And I think as a nation we're very resilient and despite all the complaining about Eskom, I think we are finding ways to work around things. I mean, electricity supply in the country, but we seem to be fairly resilient on that front. In terms of increased food prices for the middle class, I think people are surviving by cutting their discretionary expenses. So there isn't ice cream on the menu for many, and we're having our staples, but people are surviving using those sorts of careful austerity spending, which I think is very sensible. What I'm concerned about is really our millennials, who are the guys who are getting new car finance, and it's for quite expensive vehicles, and who are stepping into the housing market initially, and they will be the ones who will be most dramatically affected by these interest rate hikes, because right in the beginning of a loan, an interest rate hike affects you very dramatically, more substantially than if you've been paying off for a few years, or your debt is not so high. And that's my concern. I think our millennials are going to be very hard hit by this high.
Is the advice then to the millennials especially to avoid making those housing and car purchases at this point? Or just hold off for a bit?
I think so. And to maybe just buy a little bit cheaper, and keep your eye on possible future interest rate hikes. I think we're seeing that austerity mentality amongst our older generations, even amongst the Generation X. And my financial advice to our millennials is to temper their hopefulness about the future, maybe by taking some of the parents' advice and just being...
Okay, I think our connection with Trudi is about to give in. Trudi Broekmann speaking to us, consumer law expert. Unfortunately, Trudi, I think you're back now, but we're battling somewhat to hear you. Maybe you can just finish off your point. I think you may have load shedding and it's interfering with our connection, but please continue.
One of the issues. The advice I would give to the millennials is to take a bit of advice from maybe their parents and grandparents and to take a smaller loan, pay it off faster, and be quite careful. Think 3 times before you take a new credit card. The interest rate hikes that we are seeing may not be the last ones, and one needs to make a bit of forward planning.
Thank you very much. Trudi Broekmann speaking to us today on Daytime Update.